Hello, Christine. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
I I understand you're a spiritual mentor, and can you maybe explain more what it is? Because that's a really unique name or
Hmm.
occupation.
I think to me that means that um, there's many ways to look at the a life experience, right? We can look at it from sort of the physical realm layer, um, or we can look at it from sort of an integrated perspective where we know that yeah, we're here a being on earth in a body, but we are also spiritual and much more expansive than just what meets the eye.
Mhm.
So I spent most of my life like learning traditions from India, and I do readings and coaching where I integrate some of the spiritual practices um, and pass them down to kind of mentor people into having deeper, more fulfilling experiences with life.
Can you tell more about your indie experience? Because when we were talking last time, that's something that I felt it was really interesting story.
Yeah, so I guess I'm legally blind, which means that I have less than 10% vision. And in my schooling, I was expected to play baseball and all the ball sports with other kids, and I kept getting hurt. And then my my mobility teacher kind of met this lady who was a yoga practitioner and asked her if she would teach all of the blind students instead of making us go to gym and get tortured. So that's kind of where my formal uh, teachings of a spiritual practice began. That was when I was
Mhm.
12. But I was already having lots of experience with spirit right from like as long as I can remember. And right around the time when I was 12, I also went to this Indian festival where I saw Indian classical dance and got to eat the food. Like I was vegetarian. So this was the first time I had food that actually was
Mhm.
yummy. um, and I don't know, something in me, like I just wanted to, I resonated with the clothing and the music and the food and everything. And I told my mom that I wanted to go to India and I was going to definitely do that in my lifetime. And then I started studying classical dance when I was 19 and went to India to further my studies of yoga and dance and work in an orphanage when I was 21. And I loved it. Like everything, it just felt like I came home, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and then I ended up staying there for 3 years. I got married. I learned like lots of things about Ayurveda, which is the healing modality of India, which translates to the science of life. So that's kind of a blend of like herbs,
Mhm.
massage techniques, mantra, color, like, taking everything from the environment and using it to heal ourselves. And and then that's kind of where I started to meet different gurus and learn mantra practices from them. And my uh, growth trajectory just kept going from there. So then I married a man from a traditional Brahmin family. We both came back to Canada. He became a priest in our local temple. And so then I kind of was helping him hold the temple. And then we moved to a different city where we were now in charge of a larger temple. And
Mhm.
that's where I started to meet the people that I would consider to be my gurus, sat with them personally one on one, and continued my spiritual progress from there. So,
Okay, so let's unravel this story. You said that I think it was how old were you when you traveled to India?
how old was I? I was
Yeah.
21.
Okay. So it's, I think, even just traveling to another country, that by itself can be a challenge, but you are legally blind. How was even that journey, how did you have any like challenges as you were doing it? Because it's not just like, oh, I just traveled to another city or something like that. You literally moved to another like country and you're legally blind. It's not even that by itself, it's not a small journey to have.
I know, I think about that now. You know, as 21, when you're 21, you're
Yeah.
kind of maybe I was maybe very brave. And I always feel like I get a lot of intuitive guidance. Like actually, it's really hard for me to even see to walk on the roads, you know? Like I can
Mhm.
only really see better at night. And in India, the sun is so blazing, right?
Mhm.
Like so sometimes when I think back of it, I'm like, how did I not fall or get lost or like
Yeah.
but I think I just have this sort of inner navigation that helps with that.
Do
Uh,
you know how this navigation works in places that you don't know?
yeah, it's sort of weird. Like even I remember like being on my ex-husband's like motorcycle and giving him directions of like how to go to different people's houses and stuff. And he's like,
Mhm.
I've lived here my whole life. How do you know like, you know, where to go? It's I can feel it in my chest sort of. And in my head. So it's kind of like my crown chakra and heart chakra. I can just feel the navigation of my guides, kind of.
Mhm.
Um, and then my dad, when I was little, taught me how to know the sun, like the position of the sun to know which
Mhm.
direction I was going in. So that also really helps.
How did he teach you that? Because like, was he able to see? Did he have also some blindness or?
No, it's actually just like a common. So, you know, like when the sun is rising in the east, you can kind of gauge like
Oh,
uh,
okay.
yeah, like the height of it will kind of give you basically the
Mhm.
hour of the day. But then if you always, you know, if you know what time it is, the sun should be over top of your head. And then if,
Mm,
you know, and from here you can tell, oh, okay, this is where north, south, east, and west is kind of like,
yeah.
yeah.
And also, can you explain why it's easier for you to see in the dark? Because I would never think of it. I haven't gone through that kind of experience, so that was really interesting for me to hear that it's easier for you to see in the dark.
So I guess my eye doctor, the eye doctor I had told me that the back of my eye has no pigment really. So this means that the sun, like extreme light, um, my eyes are very sensitive to extreme, well, not even extreme light. Like if you notice, like I'm always kind of squinting
Mhm.
because like the light that my eyes receive, because there's, you know, it's basically white in the back, is way more than what normal people would
Mhm.
receive in their eyes. And so everything kind of just gets whited out for me,
Oh,
like,
okay.
you know, yeah, during the day, like, and then at night, because it's darker and there's less light being absorbed by my eyes, I can actually like when I go for drives in the night in my city, I can like read the shop signs and
Oh.
actually see, you know, like houses and buildings and stuff. And it's kind of weird because it's like, you know, you walk the same streets every day. And then when I happen to, you know, drive through them at night, I'm like, oh, like, look at, you know, this is what all this stuff looks like, you know? Yeah, it's kind of magical.
That is interesting. So in a way, during the day you can't really see, but at night you can see.
Yeah.
Wow.
One day I was walking with one of my daughters and she was like, it was a new area and she said, oh, you're walking really slow and cautiously, like what's up? And I'm like, well, you know, you usually are walking with me in places where I know, you know, like um my body knows like
Mhm.
every bump, every crack, right? Like it just downloads into my body, but it takes a while to do that. And she's like, oh, you know, actually you really are, you know, visually impaired, right? Because my teacher, I had this mobility teacher who taught us, yeah, like how to pay attention to things so that we could navigate, like without people even really knowing that we have a disability. So we meaning all the blind kids in my school. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's kind of neat. Like it, I think lots of people say when they meet me that they wouldn't have even known that I had that limited of vision because I just um, yeah, have these tools that my teacher gave me to navigate in a way that looks um, normal, maybe.
Yeah. Wait, so when you message, because initially I had no idea that you were like, what's the word, legally blind. And because as we were talking over chats, you respond so quickly, you respond so like, there's pretty much like, I wouldn't have known even as we had like started our conversation on Zoom that you were blind. So like, how does even, I'm just curious how usual stuff that somebody with a vision does. Are there any things that you have noticed that are either really different or really kind of stands out or something like that? Because I don't know how, even if I would just close my eyes, I'm like, what do I do now? Like, what happens?
I can feel a lot, right? I have this inner, oh, one of the things like that really irritates my youngest daughter is like when we're walking, I'll walk right to the edge of the sidewalk so that I can feel the traffic. And she's like,
Mhm.
"Oh my God, it always looks like you're gonna walk right out into traffic." And it's scary. And it like, this is the one thing we fight about when we walk, because she's just like, "Why don't you just take guidance from me?" And I'm like, "Because I'm sovereign." Like
Yeah.
we have this stupid fight all the time. But yeah, so it's like when I'm crossing the street, I'll use my ears, but I'll also try and like feel where the traffic is. I'm 50. I've never been hit by a car, so I guess
Mhm.
Um, and then the other thing is I use my sense of smell a lot. So like someone I newly was hanging out with was like, "You smell everything." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I guess I never really realized that." Or like I touch everything. So like
Yeah.
I touch even art. And we were at this restaurant one time, me and one of my friends, and there's this like silk wall hanging. And I just reached out to touch it. And my friend was like, "You can't do that. Like, you can't touch art." And the lady who owned the restaurant, who knew me, was like, "No, most people can't touch art, but she can," because that's how she can appreciate it, right? So yeah, like I guess that's one thing that would be different about me and other people is like, um, yeah, smelling and touching everything.
Like an enhanced other senses in a way.
Yeah, yeah. One of my daughters, like, she's like, "Oh, it's so weird when I come home late because I know you're gonna hear me." Like, just all the other senses are really, I guess, alive. Um,
That
or
is so
yeah, like I
interesting.
hear and smell things that people don't necessarily hear and smell.
Can you tell a story where when you had this like experience where you smell or hear or taste something that somebody else just, or they're like, how did you do this or how did you do that?
Oh, all the time. Like I was fast asleep, and one of my kids thought she dropped her AirPods in our yard. So uh, she went outside to check at 2 in the morning, and I texted her. I'm like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "How
Mhm.
the hell did you hear that?" Or like I can smell smoke, like from quite a far distance, or I'll smell like, I guess, layers of a fragrance. So like with a perfume or something, I might smell like the multiple things that are put in there,
Mhm.
or with food too. Um, yeah, and layers, like things taste like layers to me. Um,
That's interesting.
yeah, I think it's also part of, so uh, in the Sanskrit language, there is this concept embedded, like where the world is sort of just like we have four layers of consciousness, so the world can be seen through four layers, so the language also has four layers.
Mhm.
So I feel like all of the senses kind of have layers too. um so it's everything feels very textured and multidimensional to me. And where I wouldn't say, like, I'm colorblind, so when I have visions, like when I'm looking at things spiritually, I can see colors, but in the physical world I can't. And I think that that probably has something to do with the lack of pigment behind my eyes, so everything just gets whited out, right?
Mhm.
um but then sometimes I can taste words or feel a texture of words, um,
How
and
did that
sound.
taste?
It's almost like synesthesia, I guess, but
Mhm.
people who say musicians or artists who have synesthesia usually can taste or feel colors. It's not colors for me, it's more like it's like a word will have a texture, you know, it can feel bumpy or it can feel smooth or it can feel clean, you
Mhm.
know. So I
Give me
never
a
really
bumpy and smooth word.
how would I think of this? Okay, so let me try and think of one. Okay, let me use the word like, you know, mom,
Mhm.
right? For me, the word mom, it feels like there's like this container, like a vessel that's round and it initiates your heart chakra and it feels warm, you know, it
Mhm.
has a warmth to it and a depth to it. I don't know. Do you feel that? Like,
When you explain it, I can imagine it, but as you say the word initially, I don't really see it.
okay, yeah. So some of these things I think like I never thought about it too much and still until I started learning um until I started like studying with my gurus, then I
Mhm.
was like, oh yeah, okay, so I guess, you know, this applies in language and how I feel words. Or I guess it's also when I listen to music with one of my other kids, like with one of my daughters. Yeah, it's not like I'm only hearing it with my ears. I can feel it like in my body and see images in my mind. So it's like layered, right? And I don't know if
Mhm.
everybody has that experience or
I don't feel like I have that. When I listen to somebody, I can hear it mainly. I think I'm just thinking if it's possible to kind of learn it or develop
yeah,
it with
I think so.
practice.
Because yeah, I would think so. I think because
Mhm.
once you start meditating a lot, you're not listening to all the voices in your, you know, how typically we have, you know, the voice in our head that's always criticizing ourselves or the aspect of the self that's always wondering like, what do I look like, right?
Mm.
Once you meditate lots, you cut out lots of that surface level or very like physical, conscious level thinking, and then you can see through like a lot of that. And then I think then you notice like deeper layers of things that are happening.
Okay, this is really interesting. So, how do you first identify them? Because I think many times it's a challenge just to identify them or that you have those thoughts. And then how do you cut them off or just get through them to the next layer? Because when you explain it, oh yeah, it sounds so simple, you know? Why why everybody can't do it, you know? Why does it seem so hard? So like can you try to explain that like that process?
I think everyone probably can. Okay, so the process of like let's say meditation is I noticed a really big difference in this in Western thinking versus Eastern thinking.
Mhm.
So lots of people in the Western world, when they approach me, say, "I want to learn how to be clairvoyant," and that, and in Eastern teachings, uh, clairvoyance is called a siddhi. It's an attainment,
Mhm.
right? So the when one is approaching meditation from the Eastern perspective, you're doing it to know yourself. You're doing it to embody. You're
Mhm.
doing it to be present, right? Be in the now, be in your body. So the flaw in saying, oh, I want to start meditating to see things is that, okay, now you're not in your body. Now you're not in the moment. You're seeking, like you're seeking outward.
Mhm.
So the goal is, or the intention actually has to be like, okay, I'm going to seek inward. I'm going to watch what's happening inside of me. I'm going to become aware of the thoughts that are repetitive in my head. And so like the first like conscious step I would say I did towards meditation, because after I started meditating, I realized that I've been meditating my whole life. Like as a little kid, I would just go sit outside in the sun and just like um I didn't have this thought, but I would kind of almost feel like I was merging in the light, you know,
Mhm.
like so I'm talking this is when I was maybe 2 and 3 years old. Uh,
That's early.
or yeah, or me and my mom were driving past this one swimming pool, and I was like, "Oh, mom, remember when you took me there for swimming lessons?" And she was like, "You were 6 months old." And I was like, "No, I remember it because there was like a window at the top where people could observe us, and you were swirling me in the water, and I could feel the way you and me were blending by the water, and I could see in your eyes that, you know, the water element was in your eyes, and the water felt like love.
Mm.
And then I described the pool to her, and she's like, what the hell? Like, you were literally 6 months old. Like, how do you remember that? But like, there's a way that we can merge with the elements, you know? And I've never tried to describe this to anyone before. So yeah, so it's like, it's almost like you can kind of like absorb yourself into one of the elements, right? So like when you're sitting in the sun, the element there is fire, and you can kind of like just almost merge in the fire element and feel the capacity of your own radiance, you know? And
Mhm.
and when you're in attunement with that warmth of fire, you feel deep compassion for other people. You feel motivated to help them, you know, to not help, like to, yeah, to almost be like present so they can um, find passion about their life and themselves, right?
Mhm.
So the first step that I consciously sort of took was to write down for, I did it for like, you know, 12 hours. I just sat and wrote down like every thought that was coming to my mind.
How many
And
hours?
12, it was a little excessive. Now I
Wow.
tell my clients to do it for at least half an hour,
Wait,
you know.
wait. So how much do you actually end up writing? Because that's a long
Lots.
time.
It's crazy. Yeah. And like, oh God, then you can see how many surface level, like, you know, so a lot of them are programmed thoughts from either society or your parents. A lot of negative thoughts. Like people have a lot, I was stunned. Like my main repeating thoughts were, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm never going to amount to anything. No wonder I can't do anything right. I'm so stupid,
Mhm.
right? Like it was just like this repeating cycle of thoughts. And I'm like, oh my God, this is disgusting, right? And then I wrote down a counter thought to every single negative thought. And then like that makes you vigilant. Like that makes you, once you kind of know what's going on in your head, you can see it, right? In a different way than if you're just not in tune. And so every time I would think I'm fat, I would think, I inserted a counter thought, which was, I'm beautiful and I love my body. You know, every time I would think I'm stupid, I would think, no, I'm not a conventional learner, but I'm still smart, right? So I just like, and then within a month, I noticed that there was like a massive cut down in how much space was being dedicated to negativity.
Mhm.
And
Wait,
then
after that month, did you sit down for another 12 hours?
no, I did, like I didn't do it monthly. Like I mean, people probably
Yeah.
could, but I would, after that I would just do it for half an hour, you know?
Okay.
Like when I could start to notice I don't feel good, like I don't, something in me feels blocked, or I don't feel positive, or I feel stuck, or my confidence is crappy, right? Then I
Mhm.
would sit down and be like, okay, let's take a half an hour and see what the primary like cycle is going on in your head, right? um and then those counter thoughts, so helpful. It's like you can change the entire inner terrain, it's, you know, with this easy practice, right?
And it's
um
and it's so interesting how it wasn't even that anything outside of you changed. You just changed what you were thinking.
Literally, yeah, yeah,
And with that, I assume you also started to change as a person.
definitely, yeah. Like yeah, I mean, so first I guess in my journey, I think the first um thing I was focusing on, unfortunately or fortunately or whatever, was money, right? Like
Mhm.
we didn't have very much money. um and I guess I was, my main motivation was to figure out how to make more money as a yoga teacher. um and so, you know, I built a pretty nice studio, and other people built studios off of, you know, got inspired, got their yoga teacher training,
Mhm.
were my students. So um And a lot of the yoga teaching programs I started in the city I lived in are still running. And my mom actually started taking yoga from someone who was teaching in a lot of the programs that I started. So I was like, oh yeah, like this feels like a contribution, right, to humanity. But um, I would say, so my desire to focus on, making sure that my family was financially taken care of had me bypass a lot of the abuse dynamic that I was also living in. So it's only in the last, 2 years, I would say, that I've really unpacked that part of my journey and use these techniques to actually like heal myself instead of outwardly focusing on, okay, how do I help more people? How do I make myself capable of holding a bigger container for people? I guess during sort of the lockdown and stuff, I couldn't outwardly focus as much, and finally did kind of my own deeper inner work, but using these same tactics basically.
How do you think that even as you were talking about money, I was thinking that so many people, they kind of have this desire for money, but a lot of times it comes from a place where like as you mentioned, they're seeking it, where it's like it feels forced energy, or there's something is blocked, or they feel like, or they're so attached to the idea that it's so hard to get it. Like have you worked with some people or saw like some patterns around that? And if so, is there a way how to change it where maybe it doesn't feel as like challenging or something like that? Because I feel so many times it can be in our heads much more than it is actually, because we live in a world where there's so much opportunity literally everywhere.
I know, it's like, okay, so what is money, right? It's sort of a reward for effort.
Hmm.
I know there are people who are living off the rewards of their parents' efforts,
Yeah.
right? Like, but oh, there's so much. Okay. Um, Again, it's everything sort of comes down to depth, right? So on the physical plane, you see this a lot in the coaching, or this is the industry I know. So like I can speak about that, the coaching industry, right? There's this whole culture around, you know, have a six-figure business, right? And I have have um, done interviews with coaches to enter their programs, and it's really apparent to me that they have good marketing skills, but they don't necessarily have the skills to hold someone in depth, right? So you'll see people like spike up and, in a year make $1 million, let's say, but then they don't know how to hold a container, so it flattens, right? So the reason I'm talking about this is like, I feel like it might not be that hard to make money if you only want to make money. I think that the blocks to making money are maybe sometimes ethics, right? Like some people have a strong sense of ethics, and so it's a slower climb to making money, which, I mean, I think anything that you attain through a slow climb is probably going to be more stable. But then intention also needs to be a big, okay, wait, let me go back. Okay, so the blocks to making money. I noticed with a lot of healers, like there's this feeling that money is dirty. So like lots of people
I was
who
about
are,
to mention that I feel like when it comes to money, so many people have kind of negative association with it.
and that has to be cleaned out, right? Like that, and that can be sort of that was a big struggle for me. Like it was, so when I lived in the Hindu temple, people would give me sometimes rice in exchange for, guidance, or potatoes, or, a sorry, right? And I didn't care. Like it, and that's embedded in the culture of like even in the mantras, after you do a big ceremony, it will tell you what the offering is that you're supposed to give your priest. And they were big offerings, right? It was like cows and like piles of gold, and so healers and guides were seen as very important part of civilization. Now that's not as true, because people can easily claim themselves to be a guide without having any foundation, right?
Yeah.
So foundation is a big part of what will keep people still earning money. But for, let's say, in past lives, maybe some of us have that block of like, oh, I shouldn't be asking for what I'm worth. People should know what I'm worth and give it to me.
And I think
right?
sometimes people don't even know what they're worth. They think that, oh, I'm not worth
Exactly.
it. They don't even see their worth.
Yep. And these are all potential blocks that people have to look at. Like, okay, first of all, what does money represent to me? Do I have a feeling that money is dirty? Do I have a feeling that, people make better money than I do and it's not fair? Like, you have to kind of break down like, okay, what are all my shadow beliefs about money? And then kind of on the positive side, think, okay, like, what do I want to do with this money? Why am I hungry for this? Are my desires for money clean? Am I going to do something good once I get it?
How can you know if they are clean? Because one thing is that you ask the question, what if you think they are clean, but they might not be clean? Are there any, like, how do you know if it's clean or not?
Yeah. And then I guess that comes down to, well, a couple things, right? If they're not, you'll gradually have the realization when karma kicks you in the ass and says, like, no,
Life will make you learn that.
right? And then just, I guess, the more you start to like know yourself, the more refined you get, right? And the more you might start to realize, oh, okay, I was doing this thing, and maybe that wasn't the highest expression of who I could be. So let me recreate myself, right?
So how do you get to know yourself? Because I think that is, you can see so many people that don't really know who they are, or they think they do, but actually it might be a programming or something like that, or assumptions, or what they have been learned to be like or think like. And how do you actually get to that root of who am I,
The cool thing about that is that like we're constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm trying to think of how to, so yeah, let's say the constant evolution is like a big circle, right? So like you're working on yourself, but this big circle of evolution is also simultaneously happening, right? Oh man, okay, I'm just trying to hone in on, like, I have 15 thoughts that okay, how do you get to know yourself was your initial question. So I think that that's like a
Or maybe
process.
how do you even start that
How do you
process?
start? I think starting is like dedicating time in your day every day where you're just still, and where it's almost like there's always this split in the meditator's mind where there's a part of you that's kind of above and witnessing you, right? Does everyone have this part? I don't know.
I think that's one way how I could describe awareness, where you're able to sometimes even in a way detach from you being in. I wouldn't say let's say when I'm self-aware, or let's say you say something that triggers me and I'm aware of it, I wouldn't say that I'm now standing next to me and I can see myself from the side, but there is some kind of detachment where I'm able to notice that, okay, I have been triggered, or I feel a certain way, and I feel like I can either stop myself from reacting or something like that. So in a way, I can relate to what you're kind of saying or explaining.
Yeah, so it's that, right? It's having that part of yourself, that exactly what you said, like you have a choice, but not all people are in that state, right? So there's lots of people who are just reactive. So how do you stop that reactivity? Make a person sit, make them, slow down, focus on their breathing, ground into the body, so that, grounding is like, so you can, kind of feel the whole periphery of your body, and you feel like you're inside it, like somewhere over there, rushing around with your thoughts, right? Like you're
Or just in your
contained.
head.
Yeah. And then when you have this sense of, okay, I'm contained in my body and my breath is slow.
How does that sense look like or feels
How
like?
does-
The sense when
how
you're
does-
grounded in your body.
It feels like when I'm really grounded in my body, for example, I can feel like my shoulder blades. I can feel, it's not like, like I can feel the bit, like I can feel that I'm the size of my body. Like,
Okay.
if you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you can be kind of aware of your arms, your hands, your head, like the space that you physically take up. For people with trauma, that can be a hard attainment. So, sometimes when people have a lot of trauma, or if they're anxious, they're a bit more disassociative, so they're ungrounded. So you could say they're more in the alignment with the air element, right? So they're fast and they're like uncontained, right? If you think about wind is not in a static place. Wind is movable, and sometimes it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
So for people who are anxious in Ayurveda, the primary element that is active there is wind. And so engaging in deep breathing exercises actually is like then kind of like putting reins around the wind element, right? Or the air element. So now, like, that air element that has you spiraling all over the place, now by doing conscious breathing exercises, you're like, no, I'm actually in control of the air element within myself, and that will slow people down.
That's interesting. Control.
Yeah.
How can you talk more about the sense of control over yourself, where you don't feel like, again, you're being reactive or you're easily triggered? And as you're triggered, well, you can be triggered, but that's one thing, which we can't really always avoid that. It will happen at points. But what happens when you get triggered, that you feel in charge, that I don't react, or I have a decision, or I have this power to choose how do I react whenever I'm like being triggered. So that sense of control, maybe you can describe how would you describe it? And yeah, we can just start there. Can you describe how would you describe that? Can you describe how you see the sense of control or having control over yourself?
Yeah, with triggers, it's a hard one, right? Because they are triggered. Like it's like a spontaneous state of not being in the moment. Think about it, right? Triggers, it's like putting you back in the past. So now you're no longer in the present. So how do people slip from present to past? What is the function there? It could be disassociation, right? Where now you feel like now your nervous system is triggered into, oh my God, I feel like I did when I was 5 and this really bad thing happened to me. Like, that's not real, right? It's, 2022. You are not 5 years old. Like, okay, so that was a big one I would use. Like okay, so there can be disassociation, right? There can be a lashing out, right? So a spontaneous reactivity where like you're reacting to something that maybe you didn't have the opportunity to react to when you were little, and now you're going to. Like, now I'm not going to let people do that anymore, right? So that's like kind of the fight response.
Or maybe in defense.
Yeah. Or, you might, a lot of people when they're triggered will also just kind of walk away and not deal, right? Either physically walk away or emotionally just disengage. So I think it's important for a person to.
Is it like avoidance?
Yeah, it could be avoidance, right? Like fight, flight, or freeze. So avoidance would kind of be the flight response. Um, so okay, like what I want to speak to there is as so in meditation, um, there there's sort of like this misunderstanding of non-attachment. So a big premise of spiritual life in Eastern thinking is non-attachment,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, okay, like, well, whatever is happening to my persona isn't real. Like it's not permanent, it's not real. But like, mm, that can lead to disassociation, right? Like, so true non-attachment is the ability to be like, okay, that person over there is triggered and reactive. Does that actually affect me?
Mhm.
If it does, I need to respond in a way that is mindful. But what can happen to people is they can develop the ego that I'm above every kind of negativity that happens to me and I can forbear it because I'm so astute as a practitioner, right?
Mhm.
So it's all about watching, like triggers are, and like the more you meditate, the more you can, not the more, like if you have a practice of meditation every day where you even just spend like 10 minutes, just watching, just being present and just kind of watching what arises. Um, it's like there's a state, right, where you can be watching nature and that gives you information about yourself.
Mhm.
So the more you can build in a practice of daily meditation, the more it just organically starts to happen. Like you start to, they use this example of the mind is typically like the lake that someone threw a rock in and there's ripples, right? So we're
Mhm.
always reacting. You're hearing someone say something, you're forming a reaction or an opinion. So the goal of meditation is to be like, okay, can I watch what's happening over there and not get activated?
Mhm.
And then what will happen to the rippling of the mind is it'll stop, right? And then you'll have this clear view into the bottom of the lake, which is the mind. So what can happen to practitioners, like deep practitioners, is they can kind of erroneously think, oh, like I'm always calm. But what I found out this last 2 years is, yeah, I have a very calm demeanor, but I'm actually bypassing a lot of my feelings. So it's like the important thing to do is note a trigger, right? Be like, okay, well, that pissed me off. Why?
Mhm.
Why did that piss me off? Oh,
Yeah.
my mom used to say stuff like that when I was a little kid. Okay, why did my mom say that kind of stuff? Oh, it was a trigger of hers, right? And then you can like follow the line of triggers and be like, okay, now I get why that upset me.
Mhm.
Now, how am I going to unwind that upsetness? You know, how
Mhm.
am I actually going to become non attached and not just pretend I'm not attached? Right.
Yeah.
So I guess like one of my friends always says that I'm having like a reverse awakening. Like everyone's trying to like ascend into like this deep spiritual calm and I'm like in this deep spiritual calm but I'm trying to understand the world like it's like you know so yeah so it's like when a person feels triggered, one of the tactics they can do is to be like, okay, well, today's date is this, I am safe, like hold, there's like points in your body, so like the radial pulse is a really good one. uh don't necessarily need to feel the pulse, but just holding, your wrist where your main radial pulse is is super grounding and can bring you back into your body. Or, like if you're familiar with EFT, like tapping. So, it might
Hmm.
look weird if you start going like this in public, but you can kind of like, go like this to your third eye, or like hold your throat really softly, or put your hand on your heart chakra. If you feel emotionally like you're being attacked, put your hand on your heart chakra and be like, I'm holding myself. Like, I'm around people who might not be able to hold me, so I'm holding myself. I don't need to seek safety from people who aren't safe, to seek safety from people who aren't triggering me. It's counterproductive, right? So,
Hmm.
no, I'm holding myself. I'm okay. No matter what's going on right now, unless I'm being physically assaulted and in danger of death, I'm okay, right? Like, people's uncruel words are not going to kill us. People's own reactive states aren't dangerous to us. This is typically an idea that we have because when you're little, you need the people around you to be calm, right? Like, you
Yeah.
can't, when you're, this tall, you can't walk away, or you can't think for yourself, or you know what I mean? So, but now
Hmm.
once we're adults, no, if someone's freaking out around us, no, I'm safe. I'm okay. And then, in holding your heart chakra, then with your hands on your heart, or your hands on your radial pulse, or your hand touching your third eye, feel the rest of your body, right? Like, these are
Hmm.
just gestures to take us into our body deeply. And then when you feel like you're in your body deeply, then you can be like, okay, now I feel calm. All right. Now I can break it down. Like, if not in the moment, I can, once this scenario that's triggering is over, I can go and be by myself and contemplate what happened.
Hmm.
So this is what practice is. This is like, that's the word they use in Sanskrit, sadhana. It means practice. So this is what practicing at life looks like. It's like, okay, in this moment I'm triggered. Okay, I'm gonna calm myself down so I can actually see what's happening. And then when I have time and space to myself, I'm gonna break this down to myself. And that's how you use life as a school to evolve yourself.
Oh, that's such a good way to describe it. As you were talking, I was thinking, okay, let's say you are in that situation and you say yourself, I'm okay. How do you even build that relationship with yourself or you actually listen when you say that? Because one thing is to say that I'm okay, but something else is that you feel one certain way. How do you calm yourself down? Where I think you have to have that kind of, in a weird way, that trust with yourself. When you say to yourself those things, you actually listen to them yourself.
It's literally like building muscle in the gym, kind of, right? Like,
Mhm.
so that's why your daily practice is literally a safe and secure practice, right? So when
Mhm.
you're alone and you're just sitting on a mat or a cushion or whatever, and you're just breathing, you are safe and you are in your body. And you can take that feeling once it's familiar to you and bring it into the world. So it's like,
Mhm.
I had one of my children, I don't know, maybe he's autistic or maybe it's symptoms of our family dynamic, but he was really, really violent. And um, many times I would, try and de escalate a situation, which often worked
Mhm.
because I would ground myself into myself instead of like spiraling into what was happening, as long as I wasn't in physical danger. Once a person is in physical danger, it can be actually really difficult. Like, you almost have to fight. But okay, anyways, so I'll go to that after. So, when I would see him freaking out, because I had this practice of my own of breathing, I would start to breathe. I'd be like, okay, this is a crisis. I'm just going to breathe. And then I would, when you're in that state, you almost know how to respond to the person who is in a triggered situation.
Mhm.
So your intuition will kind of almost kick in and it'll be like almost like you're in a container with them, right? And then, you can a lot of times de-escalate a situation that way. So I have had the experience of working with at-risk populations, and vulnerable people. And like a lot of times there will be an arising of violence. And so that's kind of how I would just be like, okay, violence is arising here. Am I safe? Yes, I'm safe. Okay. So let's just breathe. And when you start to breathe in a really like tense environment, the nature of the being is that it wants to be calm, right? So when you can calm yourself down, it's like you're holding a container for it to invite people into calmness. A lot of times it actually works. Like it's really cool.
Hmm.
So, you know, then you can start talking to people, right? Like I'll give you an example of that. This one time I was like at my office, I could hear this pounding and I thought two people were in a physical fight. So I had to go down the stairs. Now, most people would freak out. Like I was with a guy, actually a really big guy, and he heard it and he was like freaking out. And I'm like, okay, I'm coming down the stairs. Whoever's down there making all that noise better straighten the fuck out or I'm calling the cops. Right. And I was calming myself, but I had to ensure my safety because I'm not going to go walk down into a fist fight. Right. So by the time I got down the stairs, I realized, oh, it's just one woman and she's high and she's scared and she's freaking out. So I'm not going to walk up and hug her, right? Like she's flailing her arms and punching stuff. So I was just like, okay, do you have the capacity to take a breath and get into your body and stop acting erratic? Because if you do, then we can talk. If you don't, and you're doing damage to this building, I'm going to have to call somebody to stop you.
Mhm.
So fortunately, she took a breath and she was like, okay, well, I'm homeless and I need my stuff and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, can you calm down even a bit more and get in your body? She wasn't even resistant to it. It was weird. I thought she'd be like, what the hell, you idiot? You know,
Yeah.
and she was like, I have to pee. And I'm like, okay, so you feel frantic that you have to pee. People will probably let you pee, but not if you're hitting things. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not letting you into my office if you're acting that way. And she was like, okay, well, I'm like, okay, so if you calm down, you could probably go in a store and take care of that need. Okay, well, I also don't know where to knock on. Like, I'm knocking on that door, but they're telling me I'm knocking on the wrong door. I'm like, okay, well, let's she's pointing to a sign. I'm like, she's like, it's right there on the sign. Are you blind or what? And I'm like, yeah, I actually am. He started laughing. She's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're actually disabled. I'm like, yep. She's like, oh. And then there was humor, right? And then she was like, okay, I can see that I have to go to this store. I'm like, okay, I can tell you where that is. And then I said, it's over there. And then because she felt comfortable with me, she started freaking out again. She's like, I'm homeless and everyone's mean to me. I'm like, everyone's going to be mean to you if you act like this. Like I can't help you because you're homeless. I can tell you where to go, but it's up to you and your demeanor, how people are going to respond to you. So I don't know what happened after because I left, right? Because like, but so that's like an example of like, okay, it could have been a triggering situation. It was scary to the guy that was standing beside me. He's like, how the hell did you do that? I'm like, you just have to realize that you're in the moment. If you are unsafe, you have a cell phone, you can call the cops or you can get into your car and drive away. Like this little woman isn't a threat to you, literally. Right. So that's kind of like what a daily practice can do for you. It can like even in like what other people might consider to be sort of critical situations, you can be like, okay, now I'm in my body. My body knows it's safe. Now I can assess what's going on for this other person who might be triggering to me, but like what's going on for them. Right. And then if your body feels like it's not safe, it's like if your body tells you, no, that person has a weapon, or no, that there's three other people around the corner of the building, like then you listen to your body and you protect yourself,
Yeah.
you know?
How do you, even as you were talking, I was thinking how contagious calmness can be.
How can what?
it calmness, how contagious it was in that situation where you being calm made her to be calm as well.
Yeah, because she's just triggered, right? Like she feels like she's losing everything. She's feeling like I'm homeless and I don't even have a bathroom, right? But all
Mhm.
of these things are things that can be solved if you just calm down. Like if you're
Yeah,
punching things, everyone's going to be scared of you. No one's going to let you pee, like, right?
yeah.
And she's probably afraid, like, even the guy I was with was like, oh, she'll probably just go around the corner and pee. I'm like, she's a woman. She doesn't want to like take down her like skirt and pee in public. She's not a guy. Like that's traumatizing for a woman,
Mhm.
right? You're vulnerable. She's probably been assaulted. So it's just like, yeah, I had the capacity to assess her safety where she didn't. So I lended that to her,
Mhm.
and which is the ability of like, I always feel like everyone should meditate because like we would have a very different world. There's obviously going to be times when someone is triggered, but if they're with a person who can be like, hey, you're actually safe and I got you, then it can trigger them into, oh yeah, I
Mhm.
actually am safe. Okay, cool, right? Like it's a life skill.
Yeah.
To me, it's a life skill. It's like if you taught it in schools, which I did actually for a while teach yoga and meditation in one of my daughter's classrooms. And the teacher was like, you didn't even really like articulate technique, but you showed it and the kids get it. Like they're helping each other out in the classroom. Like when one person is, kind of starting to lose it, the other kids will be like, breathe, right? It's it's I think it's like seeded into us, but we just have to remember it. And I feel like this is a very important thing to teach people in schools. Like this is basically teaching people autonomy.
Mhm. How
Autonomy in
do
every situation, right?
yeah. Um, can you maybe talk more about how to react or how to be when somebody is triggered? Let's say you talk to somebody, they get triggered during the conversation. Do you have any like advice on how to be in those situations, how to deal with somebody who's been triggered?
So first you got to ground yourself and center yourself. So that means taking a few deep breaths, like being like, okay, I'm in my body. I'm in control of my body. This person is scared, especially for empaths. Empaths immediately, like you can tell an untrained empath will just be like, oh, like dying in the corner with the person, right? Um, I'm laughing because I used to be that way more. But so so it's like, okay, I'm gonna ground myself. All right. Now, this might mean that you're going to be quiet, and that also might freak out the person who's triggered, right? But it doesn't matter because you're just taking a moment so that the future moments are going to be a lot easier. That's another thing in Western cultures. I think people feel obligated to feel silence. Like silence is considered to be almost a bad thing. So, no, it's like, okay, I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to center. Okay. Now I can feel this person kind of. I can kind of feel, and like, as you become more grounded and centered in your own body, you'll be able to read other people way easier, you know? So then then you'll intuitively know. So sometimes a person might need a hand on them, right? To calm them down. Some people might be triggered by touch. But the more you can be present in your own body, the more you'll feel, oh, okay, this person needs a glass of water, or this person needs to be told that they're safe, or you'll intuitively kind of start to develop a capacity to understand how to be with a specific triggered person, because every person's different when they're triggered, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah. Yeah, so that's why the more you can practice meditation every day yourself, the more intuitive you'll be. um,
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really true. It's not just a concept. It's actually like, it's really, really true, you know? Um, it's just like the same level of truth as, if you want to learn how to play piano successfully, do scales, right? like so that your fingers can flow on the keyboard without thinking. It's muscle memory. So it's sort of the same. Like if you meditate every day, you'll have that muscle memory of knowing how to drop into that meditative state anytime, whether it's managing your triggers or someone else's or having to speak in public. Like it's a skill that you can use in any kind of scenario, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Self-management. Yeah.
that makes
Or
so much sense.
it's
Even
so simple.
as you were speaking earlier, I was thinking because you mentioned that you remember this like swimming pool experience when you were 6 months old. Um, I was thinking about, do you know who you were as a 6 months old? Did you have awareness then?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh,
Because if you can remember it, then it gives an idea that you might even have had like some sort of personality at the time or something like that.
oh yeah, you're taking me into such an interesting feeling state. Um, so I would say the first time I realized that I was Christine, I was 7 years old, standing in my schoolyard. It was raining,
Mhm,
and I was thinking of myself in third person, which I always did, and I didn't realize it until that moment. Because in English, like in English class, we were talking about tenses, like our, first person, second person, third person, right? We were talking about that.
mhm,
And I was in my head, I was going, she is splashing in the water. She can hear the people playing tetherball. She isn't part of that, but it's okay. She's part of nature. And then I was like, wait, I'm she. Like I'm this person. Like it was weird. Like, so I think when I was a kid, I was in that state of observership a lot. Like I remember watching my hands do stuff. I remember like almost not like I was seeing myself out of body. You know how sometimes people say, oh, I was
mhm.
like on the top of the room and I could see
Yeah.
down. It wasn't like that. It was more like in my inner eye, I could see myself swinging on the swings, or I could see myself riding my bike.
Mhm,
And it was like in grade 7 where, or no, in when I was 7, when I was like, I was like, oh, wait, I'm the person I've been watching. I'm she. So I think before that, I remember when I was like really little, I always woke up early. And you know how like when there's a light beam and you can see
mhm,
particles, right? I remember seeing that and then seeing the light and being like, I could see angels too, and being like, oh, the light and the angels are kind of like the same being, you know?
mhm.
The light's coming from the sun. But when the guides or the angels are here, it feels the same. So it's kind of like having those kind of experiences when I was little. And like, yeah, I would play with my toys and stuff, but it was almost always like I was watching. And I felt very in love with nature always. Like, um, lots of, I didn't realize this until I started to meet my gurus when I was like, in my 20s and stuff. Then I started to realize, oh, like, okay, so those experiences where I would walk in a building and understand the intention for which it was built, like that's my capacity to feel. Like, yeah, it was really different. I would say I didn't associate with the persona of the child that I was watching, really. I always felt slightly out.
Mhm,
And then I remember this one time when I was in my 30s. I was doing like EFT, but it was called something else, matrix re-imprinting or something. It was really cool.
mhm,
And I remember laying on the table looking up at the sky and being like, I can only see the ceiling. Like I can't see all the realms like I usually see. And I can feel
Mhm.
my feet. And the practitioner was like, I think you're actually fully in your body right now. I'm like, no, I don't like this. Like, this is weird. So I think that yeah, like I always probably had that sense of me as an elemental, like a composition of elements, like my body being a composition of elements or something. And I was like a being watching my life happen almost, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. I never have articulated that ever to anyone. So that was like a cool question. So like, did I have a personality? Kinda. Yeah. I was aware of
Mhm.
myself as a person. I was aware
But
of,
like
I
you
was
didn't
aware of,
identify with it.
yeah, like I was always watching. Like it was almost as if I knew that this isn't the only time I'd been here.
Mhm.
Like, I wasn't attached to my ego, I guess. And yes, I remember seeing this in my son when he was born. I could see that there were phases where it looked like he was remembering something. So there's this theory in uh, Vedanta that like the souls of children kind of can remember their past lives still. And usually by the time they can talk, they forget, the
Mhm.
talking, the associates you with your current persona. So you kind of forget, right? And I remember, yeah. And then one of my daughters, my uh, middle daughter, she always looked so far away, and I could always feel like she was almost lamenting, being here. And the first few words she said were actually Arabic, which I didn't know until we
Mhm.
were walking in a grocery store, and these people walked past us and they were speaking Arabic, and she responded, but she hadn't been speaking to us. So these people came back and they started to talk to us in Arabic, assuming that since our kid could speak Arabic, we did, right? And we're
Mhm.
like, no, she just said those things. And we didn't know, we didn't know those were words. We thought she was just sort of mimicking the sound of what you were saying. And they're like, no, she said, I can't even remember what it was that she responded
Yeah.
to their conversation though. And then I was like, oh, okay. She's kind of like maybe slightly remembering who she was and not grounded completely in who she is. And it's creating a conflict, you
Mm.
know? But when I was a kid, I always felt like I was I was the light, like I felt really connected to the element of fire, kind of
Mhm.
light, effulgence, And so when my mom took me in the water, that's when I realized, oh, I'm also water too, you know? I feel like I'm more associated with like nature and elements and didn't really think too much of myself as like a person.
Mhm. So if you were to describe who you are now, how would you answer that question? Because even as you said, I am water. Usually people think I am in water, not that
Hmm.
I am water.
Yeah, that was so neat because I felt like my mom was kind of twirling me in the water, and I
Mhm.
felt like the water and me were like the water was blending me and my mom together. Like she felt close to me,
Mhm.
emotionally close. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So many things. I remember, laying in my crib and there's a mobile and um I didn't like to be alone when I was a baby. I didn't
Mhm.
like it. I wanted people to always be holding me. I think it's also maybe there's lots of reasons, like maybe because I couldn't see very well, uh, maybe because I felt so much, like I wanted to be, you know,
Mhm.
squished.
Yeah.
And this dog, I remembered like just a few months ago, I actually remembered, oh yeah, there's this dog that used to visit me. Um, I can't remember its name right now, but I mentioned it to my mom. I was like, "Hey, mom, I used to see this dog above my crib, and its name was oh, I can't remember right now." And she was like, "Oh yeah, that was my dog when I was a kid." And I said, "Yeah, it I felt, it told me that it was here because it knew you, and so then it wanted to be with me, you know."
Mhm.
So though I had lots of experiences like
How
that
did
as a
your
kid.
mom react to that?
I think my mom when I was 37, she phoned me and said, "Hey, I just watched this episode of Oprah where they were talking about, psychic children. And now I get it. I get it that you just had different abilities. And I'm sorry for not understanding you." Like, and so it's, my mom over time has really come to accept and more deeply understand that. But like, I think when I was a kid, it was probably hard for her. Because I was really different. Like, this one time, for example, I was sitting outside on the hill where everyone was sledding down, but I would just stand on the like sit on the hill because I can imagine in Canada it snows, right? And then if the sun is too bright, even in just normal weather, like the snow amplifies the brightness, so I couldn't see anything. And so I was just
Mhm.
sitting and like seeing this lightness of the sun, and then inside the lightness, I saw this kid standing in the bathroom, you know, touching himself basically. And this is in kindergarten, so I didn't understand. No, it was in grade 1, and I didn't understand what that meant. But my guides told me his dad hurt him and he's going to get in trouble for it. So I came back inside after recess. We were all going to go to the gym for this what do you call those things, for like singing Christmas carols or something.
Mhm.
And the kid was missing. And I told the teacher, "Oh, he's in the bathroom, but you can't get angry at him. His dad taught him how to do that, how to touch himself." And she was like, "What?" And she caught him and she shouted at him. And I was like, "It's not his fault, it's his dad." And I didn't know anything like about what was going on, right? So obviously that was really disturbing. Like, she was like, "How would you know that?" And I'm like 5 years, 6 years old. I'm like, "I don't know." Like, my
Mhm.
guides told me, right? Like,
Yeah.
so there's lots of examples of that kind of stuff when I was a kid. So I can only imagine like what that would, I don't know how that felt to be my parent, right? It must have been weird. Like, if you have no context,
Yeah, I
probably
think it's hard to understand, but you can't understand.
yeah.
It's like you can, especially if you don't really have any insight or resource to get more information about it, it's pretty much impossible to understand something that you just don't understand unless you start to expand your knowledge, or I don't know, something like that, where you get some kind of information or understanding or anything like that. That's where you can slowly start to understand, but it's really hard to understand what you don't understand. It's just hard.
Yeah, exactly. And if you, especially if you like, it was when I went to India where people had cultural context and could actually, like, before I even like talked about any of that, they saw it. Like, they knew, "Oh, okay, this is a person who sees," you know,
How
because
how
they had
how
cultural
do you, how
context.
did I know that? Even like as you were talking, I was thinking about the connection, how connected we are. And a lot of times we just think that, I don't know, even to communicate or understand the person, you actually have to talk. But in your case, to understand that boy, you didn't have to even be like next to him. You literally were seeing that being just like in snow in a way. So, like, maybe you can talk more about the connection between people and how, or even connection that's not like, I don't know, physical or something that we are able to see.
Mm, yeah, that's so true though. That's a big one, right? Like, mm, yeah, it's like we are connected through those elements, um, and just like how light enables us to see things in the physical plane, like in the inner planes, that inner light that we all have can illuminate our capacity to see each other, and yeah, it's a weird one because it's like when we don't know that we're connected, then we judge each other. And um, I remember like when I was a kid in school, like I was usually friends with people who everybody else judged. Like, well, I mean, I was kind of an outcast too because people couldn't relate to me, right? Like I couldn't play the
Mhm.
games they wanted to play and stuff like that. Um, but like I could always feel that everybody has some good in them, even like the people that other people didn't really like. Um, and so it's kind of like that. It's like if we can be more present in our heart, then it's just like a knowing, like you'll know another person just by when you can feel the light inside yourself, you know that everyone else has that too. Like even if it's only little,
Mhm.
um, it it's still there. And that was kind of like a little bit of a hard thing for me to understand that not everyone is going to get enough in touch with that light to be a safe person, you know? Like so there are that's a hard thing for empaths, right? A lot of empaths will kind of like stick by in really difficult situations because they can see that little spark of light, but at some point, you know, I think we have to realize that okay, maybe yeah, all of us have that spark of light, but if something is detrimental to me, I don't have to you know, stick by just for that spark of light because that spark of light is actually the soul and that's present in everybody, and not all souls are evolving at the same rate, and maybe some souls are dangerous to journey with, right? Like sometimes you do
Mhm.
have to listen to your intuition and your triggers and move away from a situation. um yeah, but it's that getting in touch with your own light, like feeling your own vibrance, your own warmth, that and that compassion for your own self that enables you to have that for other people, I think.
So in a way, you can connect with others better when you connect better with yourself.
100%. Even in yoga, like, so the first place where I realized this more deeply was through yoga. So I would do asanas. I had an asana practice for, you know, a few hours a day. And uh, like, there's this cool thing that happens when you practice asana a lot. You really start to be able to know exactly where your body is. Like, I don't know. I don't like I can really, when I breathe and I go into my body, like I can feel my skin, do you know?
Mhm.
Um, and then you can start to feel your lymph system, right? Like you can start to feel when you as a system is going out of balance, right? So then when you can feel this in yourself, you can also start to know how to put yourself back in balance. When you can do this for yourself, then I noticed when I was in yoga class, I can't see people's alignment, I can feel it. So it's like I can be standing in a, you know, yoga room with 30 people in it, and I can feel when someone isn't holding the right alignment and go and adjust them.
Wow. And
Isn't that
that's with
cool?
you being
Yeah.
legally blind.
Yeah. Like that's how I taught yoga. It wasn't by seeing people.
That is so
It's
interesting.
because yeah. So like, and I think there's network chiropractic is kind of like that too. Like they say when they do an adjustment on one person, it affects like everyone in the room, kind of. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the more we can know ourselves as an organism, as a, you know, a feeling being, the more we can understand. It's not that you might consciously understand exactly what someone's been through, right? But you can feel, you can, as an organism, understand, right? You can understand, like, and then that extends to dogs and cats and trees, you know, you can feel other beings.
Wait,
Yeah.
so take me back to that. Let's say you do yoga class. How do you know? How let's say, I don't know, 20, 30 people, let's say in a class. How do you know who is out of alignment? How does it feel for you? How does it look? Because that is so unique.
Yeah, it's like, so I'll get a sense direction, right? I'd be like, oh, okay, I can feel a lack of alignment to my right side. Okay, now if I go deeper into that, oh, it's the person in the last row, second last person. Yeah, like it can get very specific. And I'm like, oh, okay, her back, like her lumbar spine is, not upright enough. So I'll just go and like, you know, pull the person's body up so that their spine
Mhm.
is in better alignment. Yeah, it's so cool. I think everyone could do that, really. Like it's just a matter of like how much you know yourself.
And that's
Because
the
you are,
interesting part, because this is not about something outside of you. You focus on how much you know yourself. And then based
yep,
on that, you can now see the alignment of somebody else, which seems kind of like it doesn't really make sense, if you think about it logically.
oh man, and I can't watch the news or deal with systems because I just get so pissed off. Like I'm like, okay, logically, like, can't everyone just feel what's out of alignment here? Are you kidding me? Like, yeah,
Mhm.
my mom's like, no news for you. Cause it's like I get so mad. Or when ever since I was a little kid, like if I had to go do something with bureaucracy, I'd be like, no.
Mhm.
But yeah, and that's the whole difference. Like, not dissing anybody, but like, the whole TikTok thing right now of spirituality or like people diagnosing other people's like mental health stuff, right? It's like,
Mhm.
no, this is all an outward look. Like once you ground and go into yourself, you'll understand everything. And that's like the difference of East and West. Like literally, so many people call me and be like, I want to learn Reiki. Can you teach me Reiki? Yes, I can teach you Reiki, but why do you want to know it? Oh, well, I want to like, I think I'm a healer and I want to be able to heal people. I'm like, so you're starting with other people. Like, no,
Oh,
you have to
that's
start with
interesting.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people
Yeah.
that
Like,
think that, so let's say, even this is really interesting because this makes so much sense, because naturally, like I think even, and I have had several conversations with other people that are in like coaching or therapists, things like that, which so many of them that I feel like those people that are kind of more into it or maybe even be better at it, most of them say that the journey started with myself. I just needed answers. I was looking for answers. I was going on this journey, looking for finding whatever it is that I felt is missing or I didn't understand. But it all started with me instead of now. You might even talk if there's, because now as I speak, I think there might be some ego involvement in that as well. When if you start with, I want to help others, then there might be some ego involved in that as well, because it's coming from a place that I want to help others. It means like, oh, I'm better or I'm this or that before I have gone on my own journey.
100. And like, I've talked to so many coaches, who offer their free breakthrough session or whatever. And a lot of them say, well, I had my moment of enlightenment or my spiritual awakening. I'm like, oh, you did, eh? And that was a one off? Like,
Mhm.
we're eternally evolving, right? So to proclaim that you're an enlightened being really shows how unenlightened you are. Like we're always evolving, we're always a work in progress, we're always learning.
I think that's one thing that I always say about experts. The moment that you think that you're expert, you're not expert anymore because you have stopped learning.
100%. Yep.
And I think
Yeah.
that's where you will see people that are literally world class, best at what they do. Um, Most of them, they they have this spirit in them that they are learning. They're always learning. It never ends, and they always stay curious. And I think that's where you can see. Maybe you can actually talk more on that ego piece, because that's again like now as I speak, I'm thinking people that think that they're experts. There is some kind of ego piece in that, you know.
Yeah, it's really neat. Like when I started, I felt this very strong pull. So I was always studying sort of in the hierarchical, patriarchal system of the Guru Parampara of India, right?
Mhm.
Like so the lineages. which are mostly held, the top of the lineage is mostly held by men, right? So I felt this really strong pull to study with a sort of a more Celtic, moon-based, feminine-based path, right? And I kept hearing Sanctuary of the Heart in my head. And one of my clients said to me, "Oh yeah, well, so I belong to this priestess training called Sanctuary of the Heart." And I was like, "Oh my God, really? Like, I want to know what that is. I want to do that." So I studied in this modality for 7 years, or it's not a modality, it's like it's a path, right? And the first thing that hit me was there was no, yeah, sure, there was like the lady who was kind of, guiding us, but she wasn't above us. Like we all sat, it was virtual, but it felt like we were in a circle, right? And that was the first time I was like, oh, okay, we're all equal. We all have equal gifts. I don't need to compete with these people. Like a lot of what would happen to me in the patriarchal container was like, I would have a spiritual experience and the male guru would get angry and like be like, "You can't be having that experience. You're a white woman." I'm like, okay, well, as far as I know, spirit doesn't see color or gender, right? Like, so in this experience, it was like, oh, this woman has a really great capacity to play the drum, and this woman has a really great capacity to like hold space. And when you're in a circle and witnessing everyone's best capacity, and you're grounded and centered in yourself, you can absorb these skills. Yeah, sure, maybe it's like you're not going to be a gifted singer, but you can feel what it takes to at least sing in a way to hold space, right? Like, it's not to say that you can't become an expert in what someone else's giftedness is, but like you can feel it in your own body. Do you know what I hope that this is clear. So it's like when you're all sitting as equals and you're allowing people to offer their best gifts, you can receive them and also sort of start to your capacity, cultivate those gifts too, in a way. And then there's no judgment. And so like, say you want to learn how to play the frame drum to hold people in a journey, right? If you're sitting with someone who really knows how to do that, it will make you feel confident to try it too, So that's the feminine way of holding a space and holding an openness for people to also try and like develop and grow. Wait, I even forgot the question you asked me. Oh no.
I think it was something about the ego's role. And
yeah. So like, I think that like like our culture is very like, our societies in general are mostly based on, like someone needing to be an expert or giving more value to people who have more money or have more whatever, right? But it's like, no, everyone is of equal value. Everyone has their own giftedness. And when we know that, like when we know that everybody has a gift, then like what big, huge relevance do we hold to our own gift, right? It's like, yeah, I'm really good at this thing, but that person over there is really good at that thing. So who cares? Like we can all use our giftedness to help each other instead of, oh, like I'm the best at this and there's no one above me and I have nothing to learn anymore.
What do you think for people it's so important to either prove that they are the best or feel that they are the best?
I just think it's a symptom of that kind of culture that values that, like has its things that, like, in our culture, I would say like money is very valuable, right? So if someone has money, maybe they feel like, oh, okay, I've attained something. So I think it's just
So it's in a way like if I have money, then I have some worth.
Yeah. And I think like what we need to get to is, well, all of us have worth. If we didn't have worth, we wouldn't be here. Like our own,
Mhm.
our basically our existence is proof of our worthiness to exist, right?
Yeah.
So who are you looking for? Like, that was a really hard part of my path, is like, I never trusted myself. I thought it was kind of crazy, like to see and know things about people. And and then one day I was just like, no, this is just a capacity I have, whatever. Like I don't
What
have
did
to
you
feel
help
bad
you
or
to
good about it.
realize that?
What did it take
Or
me?
or even like to be okay with it, that, or not to think that, oh, I'm crazy, or this is bad, or it's not good, you know?
I actually went to one of my friends who is a psychiatrist, and I was like, okay, I need you to really be honest with me here. Like, I hear voices, right? And he started laughing. He's like, he's an Indian guy, so he like also has that context of understanding like people like me. And he was like, this isn't even a worthy conversation. Like, no, you're not insane. Like you can tell that you're legit because the voices that you listen to actually are valid, right? Like that you
Mhm.
can, there's evidence of what you're hearing is real. And then I started to read a lot about a female guru. Her name is Amma Amritanandamai. And I had kept asking for a guru. And one of my friends at the temple just came, and I was meditating. He put this book in front of me and he's like, I don't know, I felt like I had to give you this. And it was all about her life. And I felt weird because I felt parallels to it, but she's a master, right? And I felt like, oh my God, am I arrogant? Am I an idiot? Like, and then
Mm.
my ex-husband read it and he was like, your life and her life are similar, you know? And you should, you need to realize that. And, he watched my process of like trying to go to all these gurus and share my experiences and being shut down by them or have them get angry at me. And he's like, they're just jealous. Like they're just jealous because they can't have the experiences you're having because
Wait,
they're
so
hard.
when were they, when they would shut you down, like how did that look? What how did that, what's that experience like?
Like one time I just wanted, like I was asking about this experience I had in meditation to this monk. He was like the carrier of a lineage, and he was eating his food, and like food is really sacred in like in those cultures, because like you don't waste it, right? Like
Mhm.
it's we really focus on what we eat because it's going to create the vibe. No, how do I want to say this really clearly? Anything you ingest becomes an influence and can potentially like cloud your ability to focus, right?
Okay.
So we try to eat things that like enable our focus. So so the protocol is, you have to, if he's eating, I had to go and like sit like that, right? Like kneel and
Mhm.
prostrate, right? And so I'm sitting there waiting for this master to quit, like be finished his food. And then he said, okay, ask your question. So I told him the thing I wanted to tell him. And he still had food there. He got so mad at me. He said, you can't have that experience. I haven't had that experience. And you're a white woman and you're married. And there's no way you had that experience. And he just threw his napkin on his food and like poured his water in it and walked away. I was like, whoa, like he got so mad that he even like disrespected the food, you know? Like, and I was just like, I felt bad at first. I was like, oh my God, I did something so bad that I made him do that act of like disrespecting the
Mhm.
food. You know what I mean? Like I felt guilty
Mm.
for making him do something culturally bad.
Mhm.
Um, and then I told my ex-husband about that, and he was like, no, it's not your flaw. Like, it's just that clearly he's not someone with like a deep sense of compassion. I, I'm not saying this out of ego. Like, this is what he
Oh,
said to me.
yeah, I understand.
He's like, he doesn't have that sense of compassion that enables you to have the experiences you're having. Like, and then when I read the book about Amma, that's basically everything she was writing about. It's like, when you can sit in deep compassion, like that's when everything opens to you. And I feel like that's really true. Um, and it's like, some people start with compassion towards others. For me, the last person that I had compassion towards was myself. And that only really came this year, like when I started to realize,
Mhm.
oh, like all the compassion that I'm showing outwardly or feeling for other beings, I also have to have that to myself. Um, and that really changed a lot. Like that really changed a lot of the way that I feel about everything I've been, learning for really, like I'm 50 now, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh, this was the missing piece. That's the missing piece. Like so many people just walking around like hating themselves, either hating the way they look or feeling like they aren't good enough or, all of that. Like as long as you have that and you will be comparing yourself to other people, even if it's only mildly. And that comparing is kind of like a very primary way that we can hold ourselves separate. And it's kind of almost like a microcosmic violent act, right? If you don't love yourself and take care of yourself, then you're holding a frequency of violence, even if it's internalized on this plane, you know? And like basically the big goal of all spirituality is like ahimsa, which means not non-violence. So even if you have negative thoughts about yourself or feelings like I don't deserve about yourself, you're holding that frequency on this plane and it exists here.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I, as you were talking about this guru, I was thinking that, and I think it's not even that uncommon. It was just kind of like your example is a bit like maybe even like extreme example where you can see a lot of times what happens when the student outgrows the teacher, the mentor, the guru, and how that, in a way, like this, let's say this mentor has this kind of perception that you can't really outgrow me. It's not allowed. And then once you do, this is not normal, and they either get triggered or their ego gets hurt or something like that. Where I feel like there's this assumption that it's not allowed for you to outgrow your teacher or mentor.
Yeah, and what you just said right there means that the mentors are people,
Yeah.
which is, in Eastern tradition, maybe in Western tradition too, but I don't know it as well. Like all my inner studies are with like in people in the East. So like, yeah, we have this erroneous idea that our gurus are superhuman. They're not. They're people too. They can be triggered too, right?
Mhm.
And that's yeah. And then like, how do I hold compassion even for the teachers, right? Like, hmm yeah, it's a big thing you just said there.
I think it's really, again, it's just ego, because you, as a mentor or as a teacher, you have this kind of stage or this level that you're at, that you want to be perceived at, because you're the teacher. So technically you are better at this thing that you do, or you know more, or you have more experiences, things like that. And then the moment that your um, student is bypassing you, I think many times, instead of seeing that actually I'm a great mentor because you are now bypassing me, that just shows how good of a mentor I am. I think many times people get triggered where they're like, you can't really bypass me. You can't go past me because I'm kind of the higher person, you know?
Yeah, and then like the response that's coming up when you're saying that to me is like, oh, like the mentor maybe has a fear of abandonment, right? Maybe has some worthiness issues to look at. Like they're
Oh,
human,
yeah.
right? Like that, yeah. And even when you like started by saying like calling me a spiritual mentor, I was like, oh, like I'm just me, right? Like it scared me a bit, and then you said, that's what I read on your website. I was like, oh. that need to like call ourselves something, right?
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. Even when I have to describe what I do, or some people ask me about it, I'm like, most of the time I literally feel like just saying, well, I'm just me, I help
Yeah.
people, that's what I do, that's what I'm about. But when you have to put like titles on yourself, or even, it's so interesting for me that even with like high performance coaching, things like that, where I I don't really, a lot of times you see how people identify with what they do. This is pretty much like who I am. But I never really had it where no matter what I do, I don't really identify as this is me, or I'm this like role. It's not my identity. But I have, I don't know, it's in a weird way, I have always had it, but I also notice how many people identify with what they do. Even athletes, a lot of times they're like, I'm an athlete, and they have been in this identity literally since they were a kid. And then now, like sometimes even decades later, once their career is over, they don't really know who they are anymore, because part of their identity now is dead, or it's gone. You can't really use it if you're not like officially an athlete anymore. And that's a really interesting thing that I have seen with like this identifying or your identity, because I identify as me, I don't really
Right.
identify as like what I do.
Yeah, and yeah, like that athlete thing is such a good example, right? Like, I don't know, who knows? Maybe a year from now you're not doing what you're doing now, like we're just a summation of all of our experiences, and those experiences might be multi lifetimes of experiences, right? So how do you pinpoint yourself as one thing? Like, even when sometimes when people call and say, oh, you told me blah blah blah, and that predict, like a couple days ago this lady said, I was in a hair salon and I wanted to learn Reiki, and they started talking about you, and then I looked you up, and it was you came I came to you, 5 years ago, and I had all these miscarriages, and you told me I was going to have a boy and a girl, and I was going to get married in this year, and blah blah blah. And I was like, I didn't tell you that. That was just me channeling. Like, I don't know nothing.
Yeah.
I'm out here slogging it out, right? Like, just like everyone. Like, yeah, that's just one part of me.
And I think you also said me that you don't really like to do like, I don't really understand much about this, so I'm just like, just somebody from the side talking about how much I understand. But like, I think you also said that you don't really do it where you kind of look in the future or tell people the future, because I think you said something where you feel like it can be limiting them, or where they don't feel like they actually can have this power within themselves to actually be in charge of their life or something like that. Because I think last time when we talked, you mentioned that you stopped reading like the future.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Like, I think my phone is giving me the message that it wants a cord. I had this really cool experience in probably like 2009, where I was doing this reading for this woman. And I just want to see if my phone is charging. I was doing this reading for this woman, and I was like, yeah, I see that you're gonna, move to California. You're going to be volunteering in a hospital. You're going to meet a healer. You're going to feel so connected to him. You're going to have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. Then you're going to move to Morocco for a while. You're going to blah, blah, blah. Like, I told her this whole path, and she was
Mhm.
like, all right, well, I accept everything you said, but I want my partner that I have right now to be my partner and have my kids with him. And I was like, you want what? Like, it never occurred to me that even though we learn that there's, fate and free will, it never occurred to me that a person could choose, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, all right. So you want to change your future. Okay. Um, and then she was like, yeah, so tell me what I need to do differently with my husband, or with my partner, so that I can marry him. And I was like, okay, well, it shows me that right now you are far too expressive about your sexual power. You need to tone that down and find a way to like gently invite him into the kind of, sexuality that you embody. But you can't do it as forcefully as you're doing it right now, it'll freak him out, he'll leave. And she was like,
Mhm.
okay, I can work with that. So, a few months later or whenever, she called me and she was like, yep, I'm in California. I'm working in the hospital that you mentioned. I did meet the man that I think could have potentially been my future husband. But I really worked on what you told me to work on with the man that I'm with. And it's really working out. Like our relationship has really like taken a different course.
Mhm.
And it was then that I was like, okay, now I want to start, like, because I used to do mostly palm readings.
Mhm.
And then gradually I started doing distance readings for people. But then I was kind of like, okay, well, that's what I want to do. I want to tell people like what is written in the fate, but then also tell them that, this isn't written in stone. They can change aspects of their lives if it doesn't feel resonant with them. Like we're not stuck in a wheel. And so then I kind of like told my guides, okay, I want to start attracting people who actually want to be co-creators in their lives. And so that kind of changed the sorts of people that were coming to me for readings. And yeah, it's been really interesting. Then it opened me to be able to talk about healing methods and meditation techniques and, you know, I guess methods to help someone become their optimum, like it's kind of crappy language, but like
Yeah.
become more of their optimum self, or I guess like let's reframe that, like to sort of start creating maybe the life that they want, but with the openness that spirit would guide them to, because like
Mhm.
sometimes we can have an idea like, oh, I want this, and it might not be
Yeah.
what's best for us. So it's like, can you hold space for two things: your own capacity to manifest, but also surrender to what's your highest good, you know? Yeah. And that became way more interesting to me, kind of like it just opens up better conversations than
Yeah.
being like the expert in the room, right? Like, no, it's
But
neat
even
to see.
even as you were talking, I had a few years ago conversation with a friend who said me that, well, pretty much the path for us is laid out. It's it's kind of a like you can predict it. And I was thinking, and we had really interesting conversation because I was thinking, well, I don't really like to kind of believe that or think that way, because then I feel like I don't really have control over my life. Or in a way, like I want to feel like I have control over certain things, or I can have some control on how things are happening. And I was also thinking about how if you now let's say you know the path of your life, I feel like you kind of become more passive in that
Yep.
life itself, because now you're like, well, I know this will happen or this will happen. And now you become, I just assume, I just imagine it that way because I know I would feel that way, that, okay, if my life happens like this happens, that happens. Um, Especially if it's something that you want, then you're like, oh, okay, cool. I can kind of sit back and just live my life. And I think that's how a lot of times people can become more passive that way. But at the same time, even that importance of having the sense of control over yourself, over your life, or things like that. And that's something that we had such an interesting discussion about it. um but maybe you can give some of your insights because you probably have more than I do.
No, it's really true. Like, I think that it does lead to complacency. And I think like okay, so, you know, in the Vedic school of thought, like, all of us are having, multiple lifetimes, reincarnations, the soul is evolving. So I would say when I was just doing future predictive readings for people, the type of people that I was sitting with were people who were pretty complacent, right? They were like, oh, well, I can't really change much about my life, but I want to know what the path is, you
Mhm.
know? And as soon as I started to be like, no, I want to sit with people who actually really believe that they have the capacity um, to change the roadmap, right? Then I started to meet people who were like, I don't know what word to use, but people who, were took more self-accountability, I guess, instead of like having a victim mindset or, a blaming mindset, right? They,
Maybe
it
the
was like,
word could be like proactive.
yeah, more proactive and more accountable
Yeah.
and more willing to look at, their blocks and what was holding them back from what they wanted, or, more
Open-minded.
able to be like, oh, I want this, but is it really what's best for me? So it led to more interesting conversations. And then what I start to notice is like, you have your set lines in your hand, but I noticed that when I was doing readings for people who were working on their blocks and stuff, the hand actually changes.
Wow.
So you can rewrite like the blueprint, yeah, you
Wait,
have a
wait, wait. So
blueprint.
what about the hand would change?
And one person that I'm thinking of right now, who had a terminal illness, it showed me that she would have died kind of around the age of 30ish.
Mhm.
I didn't tell her that though. I instead said, hey, why don't you start taking these herbs and doing these things and meditating like this? And um, you know, she lived an extra, what is it? Like decade,
Wow.
so yeah, she had a terminal illness, but if she would have died when her hand said she would have, her mindset would have been, she would have died with a really negative mindset. And I just felt like, no, she can still do a lot of healing and clearing and, put herself ahead.
Mhm.
So when she passes away, she'll have a lot more enlightenment about herself than she does now. Right. And
Mhm.
yeah, and I remember that same person, I looked at her heart line and I was like, you need to stop thinking everything's about you. Like every time you're talking to people, you get so aggressive with them because you're in like you're just ungrounded. Like you're not, everything seems like an attack to you. Stop it. And I was kind of, I thought after, I thought, God, that was sort of a bit harsh. Like I felt mean after.
Mhm.
But then I saw her hand 6 months later and her heart line totally cleaned up. And I was like, what happened? Like, what did you do? And she's like, well, I applied what you said. I stopped taking things personally. I was like, oh, you know,
But so how does it look when it was cleaned up? I'm just thinking, because you literally said the hand was different. So how does it look when it was cleaned up?
okay. So the lifeline, initially it had like a break in it at the age of 30,
Okay.
which meant me, okay, this is probably her lifespan is 30, right? Um, but after she started taking the herbs and doing stuff to take care of her physical body, change her diet, blah, 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 that break went away.
Oh, okay.
And then the heart line, it had a whole bunch of chains. Like instead of being a smooth line, it was like chains. And then
Mhm.
when she stopped taking things personally, it started to become more of a smoother line.
So you could literally
Yeah.
like visually see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That is so
Yeah.
interesting. Well,
Even
that go ahead.
finger length, like, if this finger, your ring finger is super
Mhm.
extra longer than your pointy finger, it can lead to like OCD. It can be an indicator of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mhm.
So I even kind of like was working with someone with that and their finger actually went shorter. Like it's unimaginable, right? Like how how can that happen even? But it did. Like I don't understand that.
And it's something that you have seen happen like a lot of times, or it's like repeating.
The finger thing, I only saw that happen once. That freaked me out. I was
Mhm.
like, how the hell? Like there's bone, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I only saw that happen once, but like lines in someone's hand changing, yes. Or I remember I was talking to this one couple and the wife had like a very, on her lifeline, it showed that there would be a massive car accident that would kill both her and her husband, and she would be driving. So I was sitting there going, holy fuck. Like I'm looking at people right now who a year from now are not going to be here anymore, and it was just
Mhm.
like weird. And then I just asked my guides, like, is there anything I can tell them to prevent this from happening? And the answer was, okay, tell them to do this certain prayer. It's like a 16 Mondays, you have to do this certain prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And then tell them that for the next year, only the husband can drive if they're together, because it was going to happen together, right? It's not like she could drive on her own and it wouldn't happen. But if they were in the car together for some reason, there was like a thing where they both would die. So I was like, you have to promise that only if you're in the car together, he has to drive. So the day that the accident happened, she was about to step into the driver's seat and he was like, no, no, no. Remember what Christine said? So he drove, and they did get in that massive car accident. She had like a plate in her head. Like, she broke so many parts of her body. She had a plate in her head, a plate in her leg, but they lived. And the doctor told them, weirdly, like, if she would have been driving, she would have died because of the way the steering wheel would have impacted her.
Mm-hmm.
But because she was in the passenger seat, she lived. And he also lived. Like, maybe he had more control of the vehicle. I was just like, what? It, like, for me, even when these, like, when the predictions happen, there's part of me that's just like, okay, I'm gonna say these things, but like, I don't know if this is even real. Like, I'm just saying things, like, I'm listening, and then I'm just, my mouth is saying the words, and I'm kind of like, okay.
Wait, so how do you feel when you see those things happen? That one thing is that you say, but like, do you have certainty that this will happen, or like you kind of you don't get surprised when it actually happens? Like, how does that feel? Because you say something and then it happens. You say something else, it happens.
It's weird, honestly. Yeah, especially when it's like accidents or something like that. Like, you don't want to. It's scary when you see people dying, right? Like, you don't, somehow, I don't know why that scares me. Like, I don't want to see people, well, because I mostly love, like, everyone, right? So I'm like, holy fuck, I just witnessed this person's detrimental, like, car accident. I don't want them to die. And then when there's solutions, like, it's kind of like, oh, okay, that's neat. Like, it's a death gate. Basically, I learned that, oh, okay, there are death gates for people, that sometimes they can cross through, and if they do certain actions, they can buy more time, um, but there are circumstances, like a person I'm really close to had, it showed that when she was born, there was a break in her heart line that showed me that she would lose her lover when she was 21 or 20, and something like that, 19 or 20. And so that's something I knew when I saw that person as a baby. And then fast forward 19 years, when it happened, I was so upset because I was like, why couldn't there be a remedy? Like, I internalize it as I was bad, like it was my fault. And then my sister-in-law reminded me, no, you saw that when that person was born. It was just written there. Like, maybe some things can't be changed. And yeah, that was like kind of a weird initiation for me, because I had kind of started to live in this feeling like, oh, we can change anything, and then it really hit that lesson home to me that no, like, not everything can be changed, and some things are actually fate. And
how do you deal with those things when you know what will happen and you know it will be tragic, and you feel like you can't really do anything about it? Especially somebody who likes to help,
Yeah, like, that was probably like one of the most painful experiences I lived through. Or my son, who, I don't know. Yeah, like, it's hard sometimes to see things, and know that there's really nothing you can do. Like, you try, like with my son, like, I kept having visions that he would be in jail, and I kept trying to do everything I could not to make that happen. And then one day my guides were like, okay, the fight's over. Like, you just have to let go. And then he was incarcerated, But it's like, so I kind of feel like what I sort of learned from all of this is there are windows where you can make a change. And if it's a window of time, then if things haven't changed at the end of that window, then, you know, it's over. You just have to surrender and watch how things are going to play out, you know. It's weird. And then like that's the practical application of non-attachment theory, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, this is where you
And you
see it
have
then.
to re-practice it every time in a way.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So you can see things, but let's say, what would you prefer to see them, especially when it's about like things that are tragic, and not be able to change something, or maybe not see them and have a sense that maybe you have more like control over like changing certain things?
So in my experience, the things that I witnessed that I couldn't change, like the tragedies that I saw beforehand that I couldn't change, I feel like the seeing it before was to give me the capacity to hold space for the people who were most impacted by it. If that makes sense. So like, I don't regret the fact that I saw those things. I feel like the reason that I saw them is maybe so that I could be calmer and like be stable to help the people who were impacted go through the grief. At least that's how I internalize it. Like that could be inaccurate, but that's how I feel it. Like,
so in a way, like it's like a mission that you're on to kind of, if you see things, then you are the person who is able to be there for people that are involved.
That's the only, yeah. I feel like that seems to feel very true in my body. Like that seems to be the gig, is what I always say. It's like, you know, I remember this, like, it's just how it is. It's just how it is. Like, I remember this one time, I started bloating really bad. Like it was really weird. And my friend was like, why, you look like you've gained like 30 pounds. Like what happened to you? I'm like, I don't know. I'm healing someone. I feel like there's someone in a coma whose body can't drain fluid. And I'm holding that for them so that they can come out of this coma. So I get this call like, you know, a day later, and this lady's like, hey, my sister-in-law is in a coma. I was like, is she really enormous in the abdomen right now? And like, they're like, yeah. And they sent me a picture. I'm like, and then I sent her a picture of my tummy, and I'm like, I got you, fam. Like just some random person I didn't even know. But the guides kind of like, what my guru told me is, I asked her before I started, well, I was already doing readings, but I could feel like it was supposed to become my life. And I asked her, you know, I'm having this feeling, I keep having these people come to me. Am I eligible to do this? And she was like, as long as you keep your heart open, I will send you the people who I know you can handle, right? Like where I know it's a fit. And so I just said, okay, you know, and so that's kind of what started to happen. Like, you know, that lady with the bloating, and then, and my friend at the time was like, well, that really, you know, interferes with your life. I'm like, interferes with what? Like, what would I be doing? Like, I can still do whatever I was going to do with a bloated stomach, whereas that person's laying in a coma. Like, big deal. My pants don't fit. Oh, what a hardship, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just feel like this is the use of this life for me, is like, is to weirdly be with people, even if not physically, and even if we don't always understand, like this is the gig, you know?
This is your thing.
Yeah, this is just it. Like,
and
then
it's the unique thing that pretty much like only that fits you. It's you.
It makes sense, right? Like everything made sense to me. Like my vision impairment, you know, like if I had to be so outwardly focused, I notice how much people get distracted by things that they see. I don't have that. You know, so it
That
just
is so
enables
true.
me. Yeah. Yeah. sight is like a big distraction. And also for empathic people, right? Like if you can literally see people suffering, I think it's probably more jarring than feeling it, because when you're feeling something, you can also feel the way out of it, if that makes sense, or you can feel
Okay,
a
can you
solution.
dive deeper into this, because this is really interesting.
So let's say, here's a good one. I remember this one time when I was in India, there was this kid, I could feel that there was this kid who needed to be embraced,
Mhm.
and needed food desperately. So I'm walking along, waiting to feel exactly where this person is. And then I felt him, and I couldn't see him because it was too bright out. But I hugged him, and he couldn't speak English, like he was speaking Hindi. And I knew the word kana, which means food. So I was like, okay, well, I have this bread in my bag. So I handed him this bread, and I gave him a hug, and I could feel him relax. And so then I just kept walking, and this man ran up to me, and he's like, "Oh, I know you're a foreigner, and I know foreigners really like to help people, but that kid had leprosy, and couldn't you see that his ribs were like literally sticking out of his body? Like, I guess he had an abrasion and his rib was
Mhm.
visible." And he was like, there was pus on him. Like, you could have got really sick. Like, there are certain diseases that you have to be really careful. And I know you're just doing it out of compassion and you don't understand. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I never even would have, like, if I would have seen that, I wouldn't have been able to step into action the way I needed to. Right.
Mhm. Can you see things for yourself?
Huh. There's like a blind spot there, pun intended.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of, yeah. But like, I guess I'm sort of stubborn too, maybe. Uh,
In what way?
where I'm stubborn is, I think I hang on to situations. Like my guides will be like, "No, you need to quit." Like, "No,
Mhm.
this is a lost cause," and I'll be like, "No, no, no. I'm
Mhm.
gonna try this tactic, like to make this person feel better, or I'm gonna, like, yeah, I kind of fight too long where I shouldn't probably sometimes. I think I'm getting better at it.
So pretty
Um,
much like being a human.
yeah, right.
I feel like we could talk forever.
Oh, so interesting. I like your questions and your insights. I love
um,
this.
may, maybe there's something that, as we close off, that you would want to leave like listeners with, or share something or anything like that.
Yeah, I think like maybe my biggest thing would be, I think the greatest gift you can give to yourself is 10 minutes of silence every day. Um, so that you can really start to feel where you and spirit connect. It's really the biggest way to start tapping into your intuition and to help you navigate um, everything that might be feeling like confusing or chaotic right now. Like, the stillness that you're seeking for is inside yourself. And it's a simple gift you can give yourself, 10 minutes a day, to just breathe, just be present.
Yeah. It's like that book with the name Stillness Speaks. I think that's what you kind of are describing right now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Even that title now, it's because I have heard the title, and but now as you were talking, I was thinking, oh, now it starts to make sense. Stillness Speaks.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
Well,
true.
thank you for coming. I feel like this conversation, it was a lot of insights, a lot of new things that I'm not familiar with myself, that for me as a curious person, it was really interesting to learn or understand, or like kind of get insights or hear more about your story, which is really unique. um and yeah, well, thank you for coming. I really appreciate you taking your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for holding the space and the time to connect like this. I really enjoyed it.